I'm going to resist the urge to speak about unions. But I will say that a colleague of Cheryl's and mine at the department used to tell me when I first got to Washington, D.C., he's from Arkansas, and he'd say, Sarah, the thing you're going to learn is that there are school people and there are kid people. And inside the Beltway, you're not going to get a lot of kid people. You need a lot of school people. So let me try to find a way to be constructive about that middle part of your question. I can't help but have worked at the department and not say about No Child Left Behind that the intent was pure. I mean, sitting there saying we want every child in the 3rd and 8th grade to be at math and reading level, grade level in reading and math. It's of course the devil's in the details in how you do it. The sad thing for me is I was also part of another group that was collecting best practices from school districts that were meeting, that their children were at grade level for reading and math in the 3rd and 8th grade, and these were high percentage free and reduced lunch, high percent English language learners. But when you create best practices and try to bring them to school districts and say, you can find the demographic that's just like ours and learn from it, it's not invented here. So let me turn around and say instead, I know in California I've got to prove that my vehicle to the state every 2 years that it is compliant with smog emissions. I know that I've got to re-earn my driver's license every few years. I guess the question that I would ask is if I'm going to be the angel in me and not take on unions, what about teacher recertification in a way that makes them prove that they still have the skills to do it, and if they can't pass it, then they're put on a program as well and they're out. That's not, I mean, it's as close as you're going to get to pay for performance, and that's re-upping, and I think the children in our states, in our areas, deserve teachers that are there to serve them.
Starting with union contracts, she wants to abolish tenure. She wants to offer teachers as much as $125,000, $150,000 a year if they're really terrific teachers and the kids are really learning. And she's in a life or death struggle with the American Federation of Teachers right now. The national union has come in, and really keep your eye on that one. I think that's a very important thing. We are very supportive of Michelle. She is tough and smart and takes no prisoners. Whether she survives is the question.
And I won't be able to address the K-12, but on your issue of college tenure, I mean, obviously that is one of the third rails in sort of the discussion in higher education. But it may be worthwhile, and some of you may be from Oklahoma. It's my understanding that Oklahoma has a system that allows professors to pick or choose. They can stay on the tenure track, or they can choose to go off the tenure track, in which case they have the opportunity to have a higher salary and to do more teaching than typically we're seeing amongst the regular tenured process. I just happened to be in Boston earlier this week and had lunch with Jim Carlin. I don't know, again, if any of you are from Massachusetts, but he was head of the Mass Board of Education for a number of years and was quite controversial, but under his tenure, he was able to reduce tuition significantly, to raise quality significantly, and this whole issue of giving institutions flexibility in terms of allowing professors to have a choice of which track they would like is something that he was most intrigued by, and he thought it might be addressed in some way through the appropriations process, that as dollars were handed out, they would be given out on the condition that the institutions made this choice available to professors to pick and choose. That's something that he's raised. I haven't thought a lot about it, but I simply raised it as something that he was considering.
I'm married to Kansas, so thank you, Kansas. I'm married to Kansas, so thank you, Kansas.
Representative Tom Terrell from Idaho. Ms. Tucker, I'd like to follow up the very first question our colleague from Hawaii mentioned, and looking at K through 12, we're trying to prepare our citizenry, our students, to become global citizens or members of the global workforce. And yet it appears one of the greatest discrepancies we have are the number of days that our students are required to go to school. In the U.S., 180 days. If you knock off 13, 14, 15 for testing, gets down to 165. Our competing, whether it's Europe or Asia, you're looking at 220 to 240 days. Now that doesn't bring in any, the quality issues of teaching and so forth. But that seems that we are at a distinct disadvantage. And I'd just like to get your observations and comments on that.
Thank you. And, as Ann mentioned, my realm is post-secondary education, so I'm a little bit ahead of my headlights commenting on K through 12. But I'd like to bring the constituent perspective. Cheryl will remember that as we did a national tour rolling out the commission recommendations, we did engage with parents about the K through 12 experience. And the political party that I am a part of doesn't believe in national standards, and you heard Art very skillfully say the federal government doesn't have a role. But the parents across the country, I tend to end any sessions that I have with students or parents with my job responsibilities at the time, which is if you woke up tomorrow and your job was to make sure that every American had access to a post-secondary credential, what would you do? And I would listen to the students' answers and the parents' answers. The parents' answers were universal, whether I was in Atlanta, Kansas City, Seattle, Phoenix, and it was visit K through 12 classrooms. And I said, why would I do that? And they said, well, maybe if they knew you were coming, they'd be afraid or embarrassed by what they're teaching, and they'd really ratchet up the standards. And I remembered my corporate days when we were trying to get engineers at AT&T to care about performance management, and I told my boss, the president of the division, every time you visit a central office, just ask for the performance reviews of the employees. People don't like to fail, and so word will get out that you check the appraisals, and sure enough, we got engineers to care about performance management. I think it's pretty sad that parents across the United States want the threat of the feds visiting their campuses so that they'd be afraid and would be embarrassed and maybe would ratchet up standards. So I tell you that the parents want something there. I think it has to come locally. I'm appreciative of this effort, but I want to repeat what one of your colleagues, Representative Henry, said at our last session. Maybe competition is the best way to get people to raise standards at different localities.
Yeah, if I can just say, we at the Chamber endorse a longer school year, a longer school day in K through 12. And if you look at among the most effective schools for underserved populations, there's a charter school system called KIPP, K-I-P-P. Some of them may be in your states. There are about 80 KIPP schools. There are other excellent charter schools, which is part of the public system. These are not vouchers. These are not private. KIPP has a 7:30 to 5 o'clock day and often Saturday. And these kids who come out of the same difficult circumstances, the focus is not only graduating high school, but finishing a four-year college. And so we would strongly support it. You'd find in your states that the tourist industry will not like it, and you've got to have to balance the tourist industry, which likes to have people traveling and doing things. At the end of the day, for us, the most important thing is to have an educated youngsters and an educated workforce. So we have come out on that side.
I'm glad you said workforce, Art, because I know we've had a lot of discussion at K-12, and obviously it's hard to draw a line between K-12 and K-16 and whatever. But let's try to bring it back a little bit to workforce preparation and making certain that the students who are and will go to colleges are succeeding and graduating with the skills that they need. Let me present a question to you both to focus our attention again. I would submit that our prosperity in our democratic republic with a free market system requires ultimately informed citizens and effective workers. So I know you all have addressed this a little bit already, but as we leave here today, what do you think is the appropriate role for legislators to ensure that our institutions are equipping graduates in this way?